Today we're talking about the cloister. You may not know what that word means. Do you guys know monasteries? Yeah, that's what we're talking about today. The cloth. Yeah. Cloister. Men of the cloth, or someone who's part of a cloister. What's the first thing you think of when you think of monasteries or cloister? Bald-headed guys. That's absolutely. In the Middle Ages, like I said, we're going to kind of transition into the Middle Ages. We're going to be leaving. This is the last of the ancient church period because it starts around the 4th century, but we're moving into the Middle Ages with the cloister. There were a group of monks that had the shaved dome with the hair around the head, and this would have been at the time of Martin Luther, the great reformer. This would have been when he was in the monastery. That would have been the wear he would have worn. What else do you guys think of? The robes, yeah, that specific dress. Silence. A vow of silence was a very common activity. The dance club in Seattle. Not exactly what we're talking about today, though. Monasteries or the cloister, these are where people separate themselves from the world for religious purposes. And this is not something that's unique to Christianity. Throughout history, people have felt the desire in whatever religion or group they are to leave the worldliness and the institutions behind and go into solitude or achieve some kind of personal holiness by ascetics, moving away. I mean, even in we can think of some in the Bible, like John the Baptist, or like Elijah. These people that went off and joined the Essenes, were a whole group of people that went off and joined what would be essentially a monastery. They were Jewish separatists, and think about all some of the greats like Buddha, who went out and sat under the tree and decided he was going to be ascetic and fasted, and not the big tubby Buddha. That's actually a combination of other traditions in with the Buddhist tradition. It's kind of interesting because Buddha himself would have been really skinny. He believed in fasting all the time. He would not be the big tubby guy. That was actually something that when they joined with other religions that came about. Society and during times of, I guess, unrest. And remember, the Roman Empire is in decay and decline and destroyed during this time period. So you've got the whole world starting to fall apart. And so at these times, it's especially tempting for a lot of people to withdraw from that decaying world. The monastery movement, the cloister movement, has its start in the 4th century. The laymen increased in numbers. By the end of the 6th century, monasticism had deep roots in both the East and the West. So in 200 years, it became very deeply rooted in both sides, the West and the East of Christianity. And that was early on, the 1st, 2nd century, the 4th through the 6th century, very deep. And then they'll actually see another revival of monasteries, even though they'll still continue all the way through the medieval period. They'll be a very popular era during the 10th and 11th century. That's the era of the friars that you think of. In the 13th century would be the friars. And when you think about like Robin of the Hood, the Friar Tuck, right? Friar would have been during the 13th century. And then, of course, the Jesuits, Jesuit monasteries, and we'll talk more about those people. They're in the 16th century, and they would have been a very important part of the Catholic monasticism culture. And it still has an important place in the counterculture of the Catholic faith. You can still go and visit monasteries. I know when we were in Kentucky, there was one not too far from us. You could visit, and you can still go visit these places. They welcome people as long as you follow the rules. And yeah, see the San Bernardino Mountains. There's another one. Yeah, I haven't been to that one. That'd be interesting to go to. I said that repeating because people online, they get mad at me because I don't repeat enough. And yes, I hear about it. I hear you guys. Think about your own life. What would cause you to want to desire to lead a monastic life? What do you think would cause you to want to do that? So you're like, I wouldn't. I am not leaving my internet. What's that? Pressure? Oh, absolutely. Stress, pressures, the desire to escape and go to a more simple religious lifestyle. Absolutely. Loss. Your life is just not the same without that before that loss, and you want to go someplace that nothing reminds you. A place of healing. Absolutely. To walk with God, just desire to a call from God. Absolutely, you could feel a call from God, and there have to be. All of actions in our lives and throughout history take both a push and a pull. If there's just one, we usually don't do it. Sometimes, but usually don't. This is really true in history as you think about historical events, but think about your own lives. If there's something pulling you, say maybe a call from God, some people will just go because they feel the call. But a lot of times we need that push as well. God will take away something on this side that pushes us towards that call. Awakening. Very good. That's another good reason you want to be, that would lead you to that. You desire to be awakened into Christ, or if we want to broaden it, we could say any religious aspects, but we'll stick to Christ because we're talking about Christianity. But once again, you need that push and that pull. There has to be something you're not satisfied with your life here, now, and that pull towards awakening has to both be there. Otherwise, most of the time, I'm not saying that some of you guys are special, but most of the time we won't do something. History is all about that. Push and pull. It has to be both sides of our activities. And so, like the monastic, so we talk about causes of monasticism. I'm going to give you some reasons that are a little more, we can prove in the history writings. Yes, they received a call from God, or yes, they felt the pressures. We don't really read about those in the letters. Those are more personal. Most of the time they talk about things like, Number one, the dualistic view. I'm not really crazy about dualism, but it runs very deep in a lot of our way we think. What dual think we think? There's the flesh and the spirit. We talk about two separate things. I'm not so crazy about that viewpoint, but it's very much in part of our way, a lot of our way of thinking, and a lot of our teachings as well. We talk about the flesh versus the spirit. There's the dualism, God versus the devil, which I'm definitely not for that opinion, because God is not in the same playing field as the devil. But we have that same way of thinking, that dualistic mindset. And as people started that flesh and the spirit, the tendency to consider the flesh as evil and the spirit good, which we see some in the scriptures, like the way of the flesh is in the scriptures, and I really think that when we say, anyways, I'm not getting into the theological debate on that one, but we see these kind of things and develop that the flesh and the flesh is evil, spirit good. So in the Orient, especially, and that's the Eastern side, influenced by Gnosticism and the Neopelagic movement that we have already talked about, it began to see that if we're going to crucify the flesh, and we're going to crucify the flesh, then we need to separate ourselves from those fleshly desires and this fleshly way of life. So the opposite of that became that meditation, that ascetic lifestyle. So you became this. So it became this very draw that I want to separate myself. Right? We had this draw. There was a pull. I want to be separate from my old way of life. I want to go into, so the monasteries is a strong pull. I mean, early church fathers such as Origen, Cyprian, Tertullian, Jerome used celibacy as a way of interpreting the scriptures. That celibacy is the way, sex is bad. The original sin for many of these people was sex. When it talks about eating of the apple, they use it as a metaphor for sex for a lot of these people. And so they desire that monastic celibate lifestyle that pulls you away from the world. So there's this pull, but there's also got to be this push. And so there's things like psychological tendencies going on here. Remember, I said when things are bad at home, going somewhere else seems really good. And the Roman world is in decline, decay, destroyed. The barbarians are coming in and taking over. You've got the martyrdom coming in, during certain points. You got martyrs. You got the union of the church and the state also causing problems inside the church. So things are not so good at home, and things are in decline. I talk about the economy. It takes 1,000 years for the economy to recover from the destruction of the Roman Empire. And so things are not so good at home. So you've got this push, and then this pull of being spiritual and being awakened, or being closer to God, or walking with God, or having that call from God to be something separate. So you've got this push-pull that's driving people towards the monasteries. And then on top of that, people are becoming more individualistic in their thinking. See, one of the reasons we misread the Bible a lot, because the Bible is written in a society that's all about community, and when Jesus was alone, that seems like the worst thing that can happen to a man because they're by themselves. We think, oh, wonderful, I need some alone time. But for them, being alone meant you're away from the protection of the tribe. You're away from we read it with individualistic mindsets. Actually, there's a wonderful book, Misreading the Scriptures with Individualistic Eyes. Great book. I wish I could remember the author off the top of my head, but I can't. Yes, I understand that, but let's not go down that path. Even Jesus says that he went off to be by himself, or he went into the wilderness alone. So let's stick to that. Let's not over-spiritualize everything. If we think that way, we're never alone, and that would be not how they read the Scriptures. That would not at all be how they read the Scriptures. But as the society becomes more individualistic, they read the Scriptures with more individualistic. And this approach of the monastery means I have more control over how I get closer to God because I'm going to the monastery, I'm praying by myself in silence and maybe joining one of the cloisters. And there's different cloisters that have different rules. Some of them are very much like whip themselves because they want to suffer like Christ, so they will flog themselves and rip their back, and some of them are very much more, they just go off to be by themselves, and there's some that silence and some that have the great Gregorian chanter in them, and so there's different types of monasteries. I don't want to say like they're all the same because they're not. But it's more individualistic approach to God, more individual approach to salvation. And so it's not so much focused on the corporate worship. And so separating yourself into a monastery is drawing them. It's hard to say that anything is bad in the beginning. I don't know if it was right or wrong. I just still don't know. There's still some monasteries that are fantastic. I think we all need retreat from time to time, and some people retreat for their whole lives, and that's okay. I just know they are. So I don't know. Some of them are very good. Some of them are bad. Some of them are. They are. For some of us, being part of the world and engaging and witnessing is what it's all about. And then for some people, they just can't handle that kind of, they want to separate themselves, and they need to separate themselves. And I don't know if that's wrong either. We'll let God decide that. But some of these monasteries become very corrupt. Some of them are very great. That's with all institutions, right? We can think of churches here in the United States that have become so corrupt, and some churches that are not. And look at our history books. So you got this push, you got the pull. Climate change is also another thing that's going on. I know we talk about climate change now. Climate change was actually a thing back then too. Climate change is actually a naturally occurring event. The argument is not whether climate change is occurring. The argument is whether or not we're causing it to happen at too fast of an event. That's the real argument. Is not whether or not climate is changing, because the climate's been changing forever. It always does. Look at the year 1177. That's not really the exact year, but anyways, 1177 there was a big climate shift that changed the way people farmed because the weather that was farming moved north. These kind of things happen, and so climate change was actually happening then too. And so as climate change happens, you as farmers, you have this is when you plant this crop, this is when you water, this is when the climate changes, you've got to shift that. And if you don't, people start going hungry. And so as climate change is happening, and it drives people to gather together in places like monasteries. Like I said, push, pull. Things have to be, there's a call, something better, or something different at least, but something that's not the norm, and then a push from your life isn't working out the way you want to hear. So push-pull drives people to monasticism. And they develop, let's talk about the development of monasteries. Now, I did not put this on the slides in here. You can see them on the notes in the app. Ha ha! But it goes through four major stages that as it emerges in Western civilization. The first stage is ascetic practices within the church. They don't just, it isn't like someone wakes up and says, you know what, I'm going to start a group of people that lives away from here. We start in the church. People inside the church were starting to live ascetic lives. They were, you know what? Let's live a life that doesn't have all these frills and all the blows and whistles and the more celibate lives. And so certain people inside the church, and they start feeling separate from the people that are inside, the rest of the people in the church, right? Because the people that are, some people. And how many of you guys feel this in the church? Some of you are very, very religious people. Some other people in the church are not so much. And you feel kind of separate from them because they're not on the same level as you are. And that's okay. And some of you are believe in giving to the poor and not having a lot of stuff, so you give away a lot of your stuff. And some people are, not so much into that. And you start feeling a little different. And so there's ascetic practice in the church, which will cause later many of these people over generations start to withdraw to live as hermits. We'll call it hermits. I think I put the word hermit in there. You withdraw to live off by yourself because you feel separate from the rest of the people there. And so you want to, and then of course you want to grow closer to God, and it's hard to do that with all the noise and the bustle of. I mean, we're not the only generation who thinks the world is noisy. It's just different noisy. Because we've got internet and TV and radios and but they had people and chatter and work and so as people, they go off to be as hermits. And as the hermits become more, we'll say, holy, because they see the desire, like, oh, he spends all his time in the scriptures, all his time meditating and praying. I want that for myself too. So people start gathering to the hermits. And they take up residence in caves and like in Egypt where or in Alexandria where there are certain schools it's a desert place. There's not a lot of cold, so they can gather in these hermits. That's why the monasteries don't begin in northern England where it's cold. No one wants to live in a cave there. It begins in the more temperate climates where they can gather in the caves. And instead of before they start building regular buildings, they're living in caves and carving things. And so we get things like Petra. And so they develop and they look for leadership, and then the cloister for common exercises might be built. In the final stages, that a monastery appears. They build a building like a church, and all gather there. But instead of just coming to the building to worship, they're living there and they're practicing there. And they're all gathered together to be hermits together. It sounds funny, but it's really what's going on. Is they gather together to be more holy and to be reawakened, and so it begins in the East in the 4th century, and it'll spread throughout the Christian world. If you ever get the opportunity to go on a retreat, like even to a monastery for a week or even 3 days, it's actually a rejuvenating thing. I have not gone on any kind of retreats like that since these ones were born. I got to be a parent first. Right now, this is God's calling for me. But at some point, Lord willing, they will be self-sufficient, and I will be able to go and retreat again. There is a healing to that, and I know some of you guys are past the point of that, so you guys could do that. And there's nothing wrong with taking some time away from your job, your life, and rejuvenating that way. And it's not like, oh, I'm going on vacation. That's not how you should look at this. It's like saying, we were talking about fast on Sunday. If you say, I'm going on, like if you're going to be with God, but it's a vacation, that's like saying I'm fasting for God, but it's intermittent fast. When you're going to a retreat or even to a monastery or whatever, you want to be focused on God. So it's going to be you're not on vacation, you're doing something specific to heal yourself. That might include fasting, that may include silence or whatever it looks like for you, but it definitely means taking a break from the world you normally live in and retreating and gathering yourself. And I know a pastor in Kentucky that he has, one of his congregants has a cabin up in the woods, and so for a week, every year, he goes up to the cabin. This is paid, part of his job. He's paid for this week. He goes up there, and he takes the week off, not for vacation, but he writes his sermon plan for the next year. Okay. And he spends the time with God, and he rejuvenates his soul and spirits. He goes up there just by himself and just to be by himself, and he fasts and prays and reads and stuff for a week, and he really is rejuvenated by it. Like I said, I miss those days, but I know this is where I need to be right now. Yeah. So, but if you guys get the opportunity, I recommend it. Take a break from this world. Don't go on vacation. Go on a retreat. It's worth it. You can go on your vacation some other time. Go on a retreat. And you say, I don't know what to do. Well, there are different groups you can hook up with that will like monasteries and stuff like that will let you come in and they will help you retreat. There's Emmaus walks as well and other things like that are out there. All right. There we are. Yeah, there's a weird picture, huh? This is actually a woodcut, picture of a woodcut. It depicts Marius, who was said as for living such a penitent life that because he was known as a monk of penitence, he was sorry for killing a mosquito, so he lived 6 months in the swamp, allowing the insects to sting him. Some monks take this quite a ways. The founder of the monastic is considered Anthony, who lived in 251 to 356. There are depictions of him, and I wish I would have put one up there. I couldn't find a good one this morning. Of him, he felt like he was wrestling with demons physically. At the age of 20, he sold all his possessions and gave the money to the poor and retired to a cave in Egypt. And he's considered the founder of the monastic lifestyle, of monasticism. He gave his life over to meditation. He lives a life of holiness, and it gave him such a reputation that other people wanted to live near him in the caves that were near him. And so he began, and you can read there's Athenaeus, another guy we've already talked about. He wrote a biography of the life of Anthony because he was so impressed by Anthony that but yeah, so some of them, like he was upset for killing Mosquito, and there's that friar robe that we're so used to thinking about. This would have been much older time period. Monks considered women to be a source of temptation, and so this picture depicts to dispel his temptation, the monk is burning away the remaining fingers and thumb of his right hand to a stump so that he may not be tempted by the women. So when it says if you're tempted, it's better to cut off your hand, they're taking it literally. In this case, he's burning it off. Some monks go to extremes, but this is not uncommon either, no matter if it's Christian or Buddhist or some of you guys were around. You remember the Vietnam War where Buddhist monks lit themselves on fire in protest of the Vietnam War? Some of you are old enough to remember that. That's before me, but some of you guys remember that. But not all were like, and some were, Anthony lived in a cave and people were drawn to him. There was a man named Simon of Stillite. He lived for several months buried to the neck. That he decided to achieve holiness by becoming ecclesiastic pole sitter. There was another one who spent, he also was a pole sitter. He spent over 30 years on top of a 6-foot pole near Antioch to get holy. There's other monks that we hear stories of they living off the field, grazing grass in the matter of cattle. One who never undressed or bathed. Another went naked in the vicinity of Mount Sinai for 50 years. As you're reading it, more of the fringe ones, the weird ones, those can be found in the Eastern Orthodox than they can the Western, but not solely there. The communal or social type of the Cenobite monasticism appears first in Egypt, and then we'll travel on from there. And, people will live a simple life dedicated to devotion and obedience to God. In the West, with a different climate, it actually becomes more important that they gather together. So you'll see less like fringe, like solos, people living off a pole sitting, because the weather's different. You're not in a temperate where you can be out by yourself. You have to gather together for warmth. And to provide for food. So monasticism spreads actually quicker, even though you have like the monastic lifestyle starting in the East. It really becomes a Western thing very quickly because they gather together quicker. So you have more hermits in the East and then it becomes more what we know as monasticism because of they need to gather together for warmth. This actually is a picture of the ruins of Benedict Abbey, founded in 654 by Saint Philbert. The church was built in France. This is a picture of a church in France. And so you'll see these kind of churches pop up from time to time, these monasteries. And this is kind of more what we think about when we think about monasteries, because this is what our movies depict, right? These kind of buildings as they go off. And we don't think about the eastern side so much, the living in the caves and stuff like that. That's not really what we think about. We think about these kind of buildings where they go and they read the Bible with their monks and sing their songs. Yoga is actually a practice from the Hindu religion, not from Christian monasticism. That is something completely different. Exercise was not... there has been no movements or that have been associated with monasticism altogether. There have been different groups that have introduced some form of movements, but for the most part, movements themselves have not. Right now, MMA is actually the closest thing to the largest thing for Christians, mixed martial arts. Because it doesn't hold to any of the religious practices of any of the other religion of the martial arts. So more Christians practice MMA than anything else. But yes, yoga is something that comes out of the Hindu religion. The greatest leader of the Western monasticism would have been Benedict of Nursa. As Rome becomes the head, he's going to live as a hermit in the mountains east of Rome. In 529, he's going to found the monastery of Monte Cassino. It's spelled like casino, which will survive until World War II, where it's destroyed by bombardment in World War II. So it's going to last all through the Middle Ages, where we're going to think about these kind of places. By the 7th century, England, Germany, France have become almost universal. By the time of Charlemagne, it's, monasteries are very popular. As you think of monasteries, what do you think? You think good or bad? What's your guys' feelings on the matter? Good? Indifferent? They're both. They do serve a purpose in our world. Absolutely. In monasteries, we can actually thank monasteries for several things throughout history. In the medieval term, which we're going to next week, we're going to start the medieval period. The monasteries are experimental farm. They're going to demonstrate better methods of farming and agriculture. They're going to clear forests, drain marshes, make road, improve seeds, breed of livestock. They're going to farmers are going to emulate that. Obviously, they're going to see what the monks are doing. Monasteries help keep scholarship alive during what we call, I'm going to put this in quotations because I'm not a fan of it, but the Dark Ages. What we call the Dark Ages, between 500 and 1000 AD 1000. 500 to 1000 is considered the Dark Ages, and monasteries keep scholarship alive. See, what happens in that time period is a lot of people blame the Dark Ages on Christians, but it's so much more complicated than that. They say, well, they took away that. No. See, the barbarians were disrupting life in the Roman areas. The Roman Empire is falling apart. The economy has crashed. They're still holding on to slavery. Feudal systems coming into place. There is a turn away from all the great things. They're going to put it on emphasis on the Bible because of the monasteries, right? So there is going to be a great emphasis on the monasteries. The church has taken over a lot of the government, so there is going to be a hatred for some religion, by some, not a lot of them actually. But they're going to keep scholarship alive. They're going to teach people how to read. Monks are going to copy precious manuscripts. We have even secular manuscripts. We have them because monasteries copied them. We have, beautiful works that they've done. I don't know if it's just behind them doing it because they'll be a lot longer around than the first person. The first person probably started it was good, and some of them get corrupt. That happens. Some of these monasteries will become very evil places where bad things happen. Unfortunately, that's reality. But many of these places are places of safety in dark times, and there's a leader. Some places these monasteries serve as the hospital, or when they're in famine, the monks have food. A place of refuge. So some of them are very good. Some of these are very good. Unfortunately, a lot of times the ones we see in the movies are based off of the bad ones. And because monasteries do become very wealthy, because they're very thrifty, and but some of the communities become lazy, gluttony creeps in, desire to have more money. Some of them become more hierarchical, and they become more like administrations than monasteries. And they're the ones who force their people into poverty while the monks themselves live in riches. So we have some bad seeds out there. But we do have some wonderful things that they have done. I would say they grew the Mennonites and they grew out of a desire for that kind of lifestyle. Yes, I don't know if I could say they grew directly out of this lifestyle, but they grew out of a desire for that kind of lifestyle. Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right, we're going to pray and we're going to call it for the night. How's that sound to you guys? Some of you guys are like, yes. All right. Father God, we praise you today, Lord. We thank you for this wonderful blessing, Lord. We pray that we may emulate the good more than the bad and stay away from it. Lord, thank you for showing us how we may grow closer to you. Lord, help us remember to take that time of rest as you have commanded in your word that we do take times of rest, Lord. And remember that we need to be closer to you. But Lord, help us to be in this world, but not of it. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, next week, medieval period starts.